Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. This is a new presentation from www.central-mosque.com and from the Humble Heart YouTube channel. It is the 16th episode of the Making Sense series. Today we will explore the topic, why did Russia invade Ukraine? Before we talk about our topic, here is a little bit of a geography lesson. The part of Russia which meets Europe is on the Eurasian plain. This is a plain which historically and even Hitler used to invade Russia. So modern military, its mechanized infantry, mechanized movement can easily go across these plains and will be in the striking distance of Moscow, which is the capital of modern day Russia. This is Russia's Achilles heel. So what can they do to counter it is to push the threats away from the border as far away westwards. Please keep this picture in mind. When it comes to Muslim defense experts, I've been getting messages on WhatsApp from a lot of Muslims and so on lately, and they thought Russia is never going to invade Ukraine. So 120,000 soldiers, mechanized armored, army divisions, naval flotilla, air force was just on standby having a picnic at the border. Guess what? I'm recording this on the second day and the invasion has happened. Moving on. A lot of Muslims take the cues and the information from the right-wing Christian fundamentalist media from America, and they repeat the same talking points. When it comes to COVID-19, it was the same. When it comes to vaccines, it's the same. And now coming to Ukraine, it's the same. As Muslims, we're supposed to be firmly grounded in facts. Russia annexed Crimea, which was part of Ukraine in 2014. Russia aided separatists in western Ukraine in 2015. Russia supported the war in Donbass region of Ukraine 2020. And even if you disagree with facts 2 and 3, Russia has just invaded Ukraine in 2022. Those are the facts. Now, I understand some Muslims are saying that there is a lot of empathy and outpouring of support for Ukraine and against the Russian invasion, but there's a lack of empathy, when it comes to issues like Palestine, Kashmir, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan. However, let me tell you, we as Muslims can have a nuanced approach to events, to global events. You can criticize the atrocities and oppression of Kashmiri Muslims. You can also criticize American human rights abuses in Afghanistan. You can also criticize the oppression, killing, suffering of Ukrainian civilians. We can be nuanced. We don't need to look at the entire world through one lens. So, as far as we're concerned, when it comes to war, whatever your perspective may be about NATO, about the war industry, however, the people that are going to suffer out of this are the Ukrainian civilians. 3 days ago, these people were going about their business in Kiev and elsewhere, taking their kids to school or doing whatever they do in their lives. Today, they have been invaded. That is a fact that we need to remember. So, as Muslims and in Islam, we should side with the suffering of innocent people. So whatever the governments deal with, you could be it Ukrainian government or the Russian government or the American government or the British government, we should side with the civilians, and the civilian sufferings we should aim to stop, and we should support that to saying we don't want any civilians killed anywhere, full stop. And that should be our stance, in my opinion. One more detail I want to talk about before I move on to my topic is Ukraine a couple of days ago asked asked Turkey to not allow Russia to cross the Bosphorus Straits or the Dardanelles. However, although legally Turkey can do that according to the 1936 convention, but not only Russia but NATO, and here's an example of the British ships crossing the straits. Although Turkey can do that, but it will not be a very good idea. Imagine if Turkey legally blocks Russia from crossing the straits, but allows NATO. In that case, Turkey will be taking a clear side. And in this particular case, Turkey has a lot of dependency on Russia for energy needs, and they also happen to be their neighbors. So I think Turkey is walking on a knife edge, and they should really look at this issue diplomatically. From a tactical military level, that's like basically bolting the door after, sorry, closing the barn door after the horse is bolted. Most of the Russian fleet has now been deployed, so there's really no point in Turkey doing anything. The second issue of Turkey, and many defense experts talked about it, the Turkey's provided drones to Ukraine, and indeed, a couple of weeks ago, Ukraine did knock out a few Russian tanks using these drones. But when it comes to a proper war with air defenses, and it's called layered air defenses, like what Russia has now done, they've entered their ground forces and the Russian Air Force assets and air defense assets into Ukraine. These drones become meaningless, and Russia has been downing these drones like they are toys. So that is kind of irrelevant that Turkey provided Ukraine with these drones. In the modern war theater with proper layered air defenses, their utility is zilch. Moving on. Why did Russia invade Ukraine? The first reason is religious, political, cultural. Ukraine, or Ukraine Rus, as was historically called, is the mother of modern Russia, and Kiev is called the mother of modern Russian cities. That is the Russian perspective. As far as the Ukraine perspective is concerned, they're saying that Russia has imposed this false narrative of history upon us. We have our distinct history, and Russia has latched onto it. But from a Russian perspective, they regard Ukraine as with some cultural, religious, and social point of view. Second reason, as I've talked about previously, is Russia and the Eurasian plains. It is quite easy for a modern military to march across the Eurasian plains and onwards to the Russian capital of Moscow. Before 1997, these were the countries that were part of NATO. Since 1997, many countries have joined NATO, and NATO has ever pushed eastwards and closer to Russia. Let me remind you something from history. In the 1960s, I believe it was 1962, when Russia wanted to deploy missiles next to Cuba, America was ready to go to war with Russia on that because they didn't want missiles pointed very close to the coast of Florida or close to Miami, to be very specific. Picture this the same thing. NATO forces moving eastwards. Basically, Russia is complaining that you're deploying missile defenses and forces very close to Russian border. So Russia is reacting pretty much in a similar manner how America reacted in the 1960s. Secondly, from a tactical military point of view, Belarus is a de facto Russian state. Kaliningrad is a Russian province and is strategically situated between Lithuania and Poland. So Kaliningrad, Belarus, Russia has already got parts of right here. Actually, the map is cut near Crimea. So if Russia takes over parts of Ukraine here, tactically, Russia will be able to challenge NATO militarily through Kaliningrad, Belarus, parts of Ukraine, and down here in Crimea. So that is one of the reasons why NATO feels it's a threat, and Russia knows that it could gain a tactical advantage by doing that. Let me remind you, Russia's plan is to push threads as far westward as possible. So what have I learned in the last 2 days? This is the second day of Russian invasion. From what I can see and gain from social media is Russian armor is not fully deployed. Russian air power is not fully deployed. Russian cyber capabilities are not fully deployed. I think that's because the Russians don't want to have large-scale civilian casualties. What they want to do is take over chunks and parts, strategic points of Ukraine, take control of airports and ports, so they can then drop their Spetsnaz forces and decapitate the Ukrainian regime and force them to the negotiating tables. Those are, from what I can see from the last 2 days, are the Russian objectives. How do they want to do that? Is the Dnieper River, which is the fourth largest river in Europe, what Russia wants to do is cut this part of Ukraine, and in this area, because it borders Russia, there is some Russian support, so they want to take over parts of that, including the capital, Kiev. They want to chop this bit off, so they already have Crimea, but what they want to do is have a land bridge into Crimea, and then force Ukraine and the West behind Ukraine to a negotiating table, and they want to do that with tremendous speed, with least amount of casualties both on the Russian side and also on the Ukrainian side. However, From what I can see, there is stiff resistance from the Ukrainian side. There's no comparison between the Ukrainian military and the Russian military, particularly the Russian Air Force. The Russian Air Force, has air superiority when it comes to the contested lands over Ukraine. However, the Ukrainians are resisting. Those who follow my Twitter account will probably seen this tweet about Vitaly Skakun of Ukraine. What he did is he wanted to blow up a bridge, and he blew himself up in a suicide mission to stop the Russian tank column from advancing deeper into Ukraine. Yes, it was a suicide mission, and he slowed down the advancement. So they are determined to stop Russian invasion and takeover of their land. However, Russia enjoys vast qualitative and quantitative military advantage. Why is this man Putin doing it? Very simple. He came from the KGB, and he still has dreams about restoring Soviet Union glory. Now, this could be out of sync with modern Russia. Those who are newer, probably don't remember Soviet Union. However, this guy was fed on a diet of Soviet Union glory, and he wants to somehow try to be able to restore Soviet glory. From what I can see on social media, even from Russian sources, there is a lot of resentment and opposition in Russia about invading Ukraine. How and why would this plan not work? If the idea was to basically not have NATO on the border, this has actually, as of now and probably in the future, will work the opposite way. Because what NATO will do is NATO is now re-energized. Over the last few years, there was some reason for people to question the existence of NATO, particularly from France, some voices from Germany. Because of Russia now invading Ukraine, the opposite has happened. NATO has been re-energized, and people are saying, well, hold on, we really still need NATO, because Russia can basically invade across Eastern Europe at least. Secondly, as I've said, NATO is going to be right on the border of Russia. So even if Russia is somehow able to split and take over parts of Ukraine and install a pro-Russian regime, NATO is going to be right on the border. Thirdly, from what I can understand from open intelligence sources, there's been poor intelligence. Russian military has got poor intelligence. They have poor non-commissioned officers and command structures. Many of the soldiers are conscripts, and Russia can get bogged down. This is the initial phases of the war, and we need to see what happens. If there is a massive insurgency in Ukraine, the West, the UK, the US, and the NATO will provide arms, and Russia will very seriously get bogged down into a long insurgency. This is kind of what happened in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when Russia went into Afghanistan. They took Kabul in almost no time. However, then they were bogged down by insurgency, and the weapons were provided by America at that time. The Russian society is already under sanctions. There's already economic hardship. If the world turns away from Russian fuel, which is one of the main assets of Russian economy, and there are more civilian deaths, which Russia tries to crush, just like what they did in Afghanistan, then this will go from bad to worse for Russia. So from what we need to do is we need to watch this space. If this does not finish in the next few weeks, this could end up very badly for Russia. So watch this space and see what happens. It could be that Russia could win in the next few weeks and annex large chunks of Ukraine, decapitate the government, and force Ukraine to the negotiating table. Let's see what happens. As far as the Muslims are concerned, we need to be aware of a new development today. There have been some news on the social media about large chunks of Chechnyan soldiers being deployed to Ukraine. These are battle-hardened soldiers, and Chechen race, they're a martial race, very good at what they do, and they're responding to their country. They're part of the armed forces, and they're responding. However, the Islamophobic, anti-Muslim, right-wing media is gonna somehow throw all human rights abuses, etc., into this Chechnya and try to give it a color of Islam. It's already happening. I took these pictures from the internet, and what they're saying is, look, these Muslims are getting ready to kill the kuffar, and they're ready to pray. So first of all, first part of disinformation and propaganda, this isn't a recent picture. This is not Grozny, and this is not part of Russia. in the middle of February ground, and the leaf cover will not look like that. However, be prepared if these Chechnyan soldiers end up in Ukraine. We may have a problem, and the media might try to give it an Islamophobic color. I will end at that. And I will again say that as Muslims, we can take a nuanced stance. We can say we stand against human rights abuses and oppression of civilians everywhere, and that includes Ukraine. I will finish this with a clip which has been circulated on social media about the Chechnyans, which are obviously Muslims. Large chunks of these battalions are Muslims. But they are also Russians, and they are in the military, so they may respond to the call of their country. And you will see in the next coming weeks or so, if they get involved, how the media will turn this and try to picture this as a Muslim versus a non-Muslim issue. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Пользуясь случаем, хочу задать совет пока действующему президенту Зеленскому, пока он не стал экс-президентом Украины, чтобы он поскорее позвонил нашему президенту, верховному главнокомандующему Владимиру Путину, попросил извинить.